Hello and welcome to Rach Aquarelle. My name is Rachel and this video is going to be a little bit different. Rather than doing a tutorial, I'm going to be adding some new colors to my watercolor palette. So pretty excited about that. It's not very often that I buy new colors, but I could not resist these. So this is a set made by R.M.Broadwell, and I've actually never used this brand before, but I noticed they have all these different sets, and these watercolors are made with honey, apparently, which is something I've never heard of. And I thought that this set looked pretty intriguing, so I ordered them online and I just got them, so I'm very excited. So we have a sepia, a Hansa yellow deep, burnt sienna, Payne's gray, which is a color I've actually always wanted, and Pyrrole red. I think that's how you pronounce it. And so I'm going to be adding these beautiful new colors to my palette and giving them a try as well. So one thing I thought was interesting about this set is that there's no blue, and I think that Payne's gray is kind of a very cool gray, so I'm wondering how well it'll do to kind of replace the need for a blue. And then here is burnt sienna, kind of an earthy color. I'm not sure that I've ever actually owned a burnt sienna either. Sepia. I definitely know that I've never had this color before, and one of the reasons I was really drawn to this set is that I've actually never used any of these colors before. So here's the Pyrrole red. I'm not sure if it's going to lean, I'm guessing it'll lean toward the warm temperature, but we'll see. And then last is this Hansa yellow deep. Also not sure which temperature direction that will lean. The earth tones I think definitely are going to be warmer, and then I'm thinking that the Payne's gray will be pretty cool, hopefully. So just go ahead and set the box aside for now. And here is my favorite palette. This is my ceramic palette, and I have almost all the colors that I own in this palette. I keep my primary colors over here on the right and on the left. These are some of what I call vanity colors. They're a little bit specialized. Then I have a bit of turquoise and some Prussian blue up there. I like to have a lot of blues. And it just so happens that I have 5 empty wells just waiting for some new color. I was keeping some white gouache in one of those wells, or maybe 2, but I kind of have learned over time that it's better to use gouache when it's freshly squeezed from the tube, because when gouache dries, it doesn't reactivate as well as just typical watercolors. So I decided to go ahead and take the white gouache out of those wells so that I'd have more room for colors. And then if I need to use white gouache, I'll just pour some, just a little bit, onto my mixing tray. So I want to keep these in order So I started with my Hansa Yellow Deep, and then right next to it I put the Purell Red. And I wanted to see how this would compare to my Warm Red, my Scarlet Lake, and my Permanent Rose. So it's definitely a more warm red. Seems maybe just a touch cooler in temperature than my Scarlet Lake. Next, I'm putting Sepia in the palette. And I think Sepia it's definitely a warm, neutral color. But I think that it is almost as close as you get it to black rather than buying black. Burnt Umber is going to be next. It's also a very earthy color, but definitely has a very strong warm temperature. Actually, I wish I had put the Burnt Sienna right next to my Purell Red, but maybe next time. And then last but not least, in fact I'm very excited about adding this color to my palette. I have a feeling I might use it quite a bit, but we'll see. Alright, so now I've got this palette filled completely. Can't buy any more watercolor, so we'll see how that goes. And I'm gonna go ahead and just put these back in order. And when I store watercolor tubes, I put them in a container with a lid, preferably one that's airtight. I learned a while ago that the best way to store watercolor tubes is in an airtight container, because apparently they can dry out a little bit even through the tube. I don't know if that's really true, but rather be safe than sorry. Alright. So now I'm going to just play around with my new colors a little bit, and I think what I'll do is just kind of apply some swatches over on the left-hand side of this paper. And then I'll save some space, and on the right side I'm just going to try to loosely mimic that beautiful painting on the box of this watercolor set. I'm just going to use my mop brush for all of this. So we'll start with my Hansa Yellow Deep, and I kind of want to apply it very boldly and then gradually add a little more water to it to see how the range of values can go. And it seems like I still have a lot of pigment in my bristles, but that's okay. So right off the bat, I don't really notice anything particularly special about the Hansa Yellow Deep. It's temperature-wise right in between my lemon yellow and my New Gamboge, which is my warm yellow. Next, my Purell Red. I'm going to add just a little bit more pigment to begin with. This is a really nice, bold red. I really like it. I could definitely see using this color quite a lot. Okay, so now my sepia. So we're going to kind of see how this actually looks on paper. It's so dark it's kind of hard to tell when it's in its concentrated little pile over there. But it's kind of what I thought, you know, it's definitely a bit warmer in temperature, but very dark, very bold. Could easily mix that with a blue to get a nice gray or black, and probably with the Payne's gray as well to get a really nice black. Next is the, was it burnt umber? I think so. So you can see it's much warmer in temperature than the sepia. On the back of the box, it was described as being a brick red, which I can see that. Alright, so now I get to try the Payne's Gray. Long anticipated. So yeah, it's definitely neutral, but very cool in temperature. And I'm adding a little bit more to the bottom just because I want to glaze it with the Hansa yellow to see what effect that gives. If you look at the box, you can see an area where it looks a little bit teal, and I am imagining that they got that color by using the Payne's Gray and the Hansa yellow together. So I'm going to place these right next to each other, let them bleed together a little bit, and then when they dry, I'm going to just add a little bit of glazing so I can see what the possibilities are. And even though this set is for cityscapes, of course you can use this for any subject. And so I think the biggest challenge will just be not having access to mixing your typical green. So I'm just going to see how close I can get. And now I'm just kind of messing around. I'm not doing any sketching ahead of time because the purpose of this is really just to kind of see how these colors can all work together. And so I'm just very loosely going to try to mimic the painting on the box. So I'm going to start out with the Hansa Yellow Deep. Not really sure where to add the burnt umber, but I'm just going to kind of wing it, add it up there. I think you could almost go either way with the burnt sienna or using yellow and the Pyrrole red. I forgot about, there's little taxi cabs driving on a street at night, so just gonna add a couple little swatches for those. Then we'll see what I can do with this Payne's Gray. Just start blocking in some of the darker areas, although I'm keeping this pretty watery, so it's not going to dry very dark. And now I'm just painting the shadow underneath the taxi cabs and leaving just a little bit of white for where the headlights are reflecting on the pavement. And I'll just use a light wash for these sidewalks over here. The only place where I really see red, I know it's very small, but it looks like there's maybe just some people walking on the sidewalk, and they're basically just little swatches of red. So I'll probably save that for pretty close to last. And then there's this overhead, I really don't know what this is, but it's over the taxi cabs. I'm really trying to get into the habit when I paint to not think of the literal thing that I'm painting, and I'm really trying to just think of things as abstract shapes with different color, temperature, and value notes. But it's also kind of challenging to try to describe what I'm doing without describing those literal objects. So I'm using the sepia just a little bit for these dark reflections. In more Payne's grades, you start adding just a little bit of definition and structure. I really didn't leave any white where the street lights are or the headlights of the taxi cabs. So probably will go in with a little bit of white gouache just to add those. Not that it's any big deal, but since I did manage to leave a little bit of white for the reflection of the headlights, I may as well. I actually plan to use this set of colors for painting on plein air, even though I do not live in a city. I live in a very small town, but I really like the idea of having a very limited and unique palette and trying to make that work for an array of subject matter. So I think that'll be interesting, and I'm planning to make more of these videos while I'm painting on plein air or painting in like a cafe. Of course, I do not take my ceramic palettes to paint on location because I really love my ceramic palette and I don't want to risk breaking it. I would just be heartbroken if that happened. It's not an insanely expensive thing, but I'd prefer not to have to buy another one. And I'm very accident prone, so I actually have a travel palette, and I'm going to show you that in this video as well because okay, so I do have a travel palette and I use it a lot, but I found another one and I bought it. It was definitely an impulse buy, but I'm really excited about it, and I also just got that, so I'm going to be adding some of these colors to that as well. Alright, so I added little swooshes for some people in the distance. I added just a little bit of red into those streetlights. I think that the burnt sienna just wasn't quite doing it. I think I called it burnt umber earlier. It is a burnt sienna. Burnt umber is probably a little bit closer to that sepia color. Sometimes it's hard to keep all the names of colors straight. So there's, on this palette, burnt sienna, and then sepia. And when I paint in oils, I use either burnt umber or raw umber. So all these earth tones, I tend to get them a little bit confused sometimes. So now I'm just starting to add a little bit more structure, adding some lines for these light poles. I'm not quite achieving that nice, beautiful turquoise color, so maybe that's something I'm just going to have to practice more. Maybe I needed to use Boulder Yellow and a light glaze of the Payne's Gray. But when I was looking at this set online, that was one thing that just really intrigued me about this set, was that the painting on the box, I have to assume, was done with only these colors. And they got that really nice turquoise and without an actual blue. And so I really like the idea of mixing colors that are, you know, not obvious. So I like the idea of maybe using this Payne's Gray and yellow and getting sometimes that nice turquoise color, but it looks like maybe I need to just practice that a little bit. We'll see. The water's getting pretty muddy here, but I think I'm actually just pretty close to being finished. And I think that I do want to go ahead and just use a little white gouache. So I'm just going to try to add a very, very small amount of that to my mixing palette. Because as I said, I learned kind of the hard way that gouache, at least the gouache that I have, which is Winsor & Newton designer gouache, it does not reactivate very well. And so I guess the way that most people use gouache is that they just squeeze it out when they're ready to paint, and whatever they don't use, they end up just washing away. I don't really like the idea of wasting at all. So I'm gonna try to just keep it very minimal. And I obviously didn't need a lot of gouache for this painting because I just needed to add those headlights and the street lights. I'm gonna add just a few swipes to the road. Maybe a few lesser details. Nothing big. A few more reflections. So I have a very basic set of gouache paints, and I had put those in my plein air palette, and I just let them dry the way that I let my watercolors dry. And then when I went to use them again, they just did not ever reactivate to the consistency that you really want for gouache. Because with gouache, the point is that it's not transparent, but when it's very watery, it is kind of just milky looking. So I had to just kind of scrape out all that dried gouache from my plein air palette, which was sad because I just really don't like wasting paints. Oh, and that's right, I was going to apply some glazes with the Payne's Gray and the Hansa Yellow Deep. So I just applied a little glaze over the Payne's Gray. Now let's put some Payne's Gray over the yellow. Still definitely not seeing this turquoise color, but as I said, it just might be one of those things I need a little more experience and practice with. So I think that is where I'll call it quits with this little fun sample painting, and I'm just gonna go ahead and clean up my mixing palette. So sad to say goodbye to these brand new colors already, but I am very excited about this set and excited to add that to my plein air set. And I'll go ahead and just remove the tape here from this little sample. Always my favorite part, even when I'm just doing a very casual experimental painting, removing the tape is, I think, always going to just be my favorite part. I mean, of course, other than the actual painting process, because that's fun too. But I just love those clean edges, and I love how this really just signifies that we're done. So I'll show you just a bit of a close-up. You can see I kept that painting very, very loose, and I am trying to loosen up a little bit and not be so literal with my painting. And I'm really happy with this set. There are so many other sets from M. Graham with 5 colors, and like I said, I picked this one just because I thought this was very unique, and I don't have any of these colors. Oh, and here is this little urban sketching palette that I just got off of Etsy. I love this. I'm going to put a link to the Etsy shop where I bought this in the description if you might be interested. So it's made out of wood, and it opens, and there are 4 wells. Now, this person who makes these has lots of different styles, so you can get one with more wells, and you can actually get one with just 1 well in there. I thought I was kind of excited about the idea of just having 4 wells, although of course I would have rather had 5 so that I could fit all these colors into it. But I like the idea of just having a few wells so that there's no temptation to go crazy with having tons and tons of colors, because especially with plein air painting or urban sketching, it's really important to be able to make quick decisions. And so sometimes the more color options you have, the harder that is. So I've decided just to add the Hansa Yellow, the Pyrrole Red, the Sepia, and the Payne's Gray. I decided to leave the Burnt Sienna out because I figure I can do with red and yellow anything that I might want to do with the Burnt Sienna. So since I have to narrow it down to 4, that's what I decided to go with. So I'm going to go ahead and just add these to the palette. I'm going to try not to overfill the wells. And that white circle on the top of the palette is actually a tiny little mixing area. So you can see there's not a lot of room for mixing. And I want to try just using glazes rather than mixing on my palette when I'm painting outdoors, because I think that is also a good way to work when you're trying to be very efficient and make decisions very quickly. So I think it'll be a challenge to not have a big mixing palette, but I think ultimately it's going to help my process. And another good thing about buying this set from R.M. was that these individual colors, if I had bought all 5 of these individually, they would have been more expensive than buying them in the set. And the size of the tubes are actually very generous. So times that I've bought sets from like Daniel Smith or even Winsor & Newton, the tubes that you get are actually very much on the smaller side. So I'm really happy that these are actually quite regular sized tubes. So I'll give you kind of a close-up look at this. I think that the wells are sufficiently deep to hold plenty of watercolor, and I just love the feel of this. I love how small it is. It's very minimalist. I hope that I don't lose it. And again, a link for this Etsy shop will be in the description. Thank you.